So I enjoy playing Vampire the Masquerade. It is by far my favorite RPG, and I think I have a decent grasp on how to roleplay the different clans. I find a game online to play over Discord, and we have our session 0, and things are looking okay. I make a Malkavian tattoo artist who suffers from ADHD and synthesia, since Malkavians tend to have issues with their mental health. I choose these conditions because I have them too, and I don't want to choose anything that I could portray wrong. When I told the storyteller this, he made it a point to tell me those conditions are not real mental health issues, and that I should have more crazy to play correctly. When other players tried to explain to him that, yes, ADHD and synthesia are real mental health conditions, he ended up getting mad and canceled the game because we refused to play correctly and admit that ADHD was fake? This was session 0. We never even got to play. Well, look on the bright side. That shit show ended before the first dice hit the table. Seems like a win to me. So I'm not entirely sure if this counts because it didn't get to a game, or even got to a hint of a game, but here we go anyway. A coworker of mine and I are talking, and I mentioned D&D as a hobby. He asks what that is, and if it's like that thing they play in Stranger Things. Cue me explaining, admittedly in an overly enthusiastic manner, what D&D is. There's a few miscommunication moments, and he's not sure if it's a board game or a video game. I get through by calling it a sort of dice-based board game with theater improv as a main element, describing my current game and character, and also describing the others in the party. He randomly asks if, and I quote, "Do any females play this game?" I don't respond very well, coming up with, well, it's mostly a guy thing I guess, but it's open to anyone who wants to play. You just meet who you meet. I then continue on. After some back and forth about how to play, me describing my Discord voice game, etc., I've moved on to describing about character classes, giving a limited overview, and he cuts me off mid-description to ask, "So if you play with video, how often do you see females on video? Do you, see the females?" At that point, I mysteriously ran out of break time. I think I'm going to forget to let him borrow my player's handbook as well. Yep, that's rough, buddy. I mean, I don't know what to say about that. Don't play with people like that. It'll go badly for you. Okay, next story. This story takes place in a game of 5th edition I played on Roll20, which lasted about 2 sessions. The premise of the campaign was that the player characters were colonizing a new continent and carving out their own holdings. I think one player wanted to establish a temple to his god. I don't remember what the other player's ambitions were though. My character's was to establish a barony for himself, being a 7th son of his noble family, and unlikely to inherit anything himself. Enter Machiavellian genius. We'll say Mac for short. He was very vague about what his character was like during the session 0 we had, saying that he was content to just roll with the rest of the party. That wasn't too much cause for alarm, but he constantly spoke about his desire to play a Varys-like character, who was from Game of Thrones. A Song of Ice and Fire was his favorite book series, which he would constantly reference. He would speak constantly about his character's political savvy, and refer to all these fallacious assumptions to which the DM would constantly correct him on. To make things worse, he would argue with literally everything that every player said regarding their own goals and say in the most smug tone imaginable, "So it would seem," when we talk about our plans for the future. Finally, he constantly quote one line from The Prince, "'Tis better to be feared than loved," whenever he would allude to his oh-so-mysterious chessmaster of a character he had planned. I ended up calling him out on this during the end of the session 0, saying that while Machiavelli had said that it was better to be feared than loved, he made it clear that that was only in a situation where a ruler was forced to choose between the two, and he makes it clear in his work that the ideal ruler is one who is both feared and loved. This really set Mac off. He began stammering and speaking very quickly, saying that he knew that, and started quoting Varys from A Song of Ice and Fire wildly before admitting that he hadn't actually read The Prince. But he knew what he was talking about, and continued his smug tirades anyway. Finally, session 1 came and we began playing with each other properly, as the DM put forward various different starts to our adventure pertaining to how we reached this new continent, whether we had any patrons to provide wealth, how big our fleet was, and our group of colonizers. The group was debating this, and Mac went radio silent. He messaged the DM while the other players and I weighed our options. Finally, he comes back on, starts talking to the DM about all this stuff that no one else has any idea about, and his plans to be the true power behind the powers. See, his plan for the campaign, from what I could piece together from everything he was saying, and from my own recollections, was to essentially use the other player characters as patsies to rule behind as sort of a shadow ruler. Now, if he'd actually said that this was what he was planning to do prior to the game, I may have been amiable to it, but the assumption that every other player would just be fine with it, and his numerous private conversations with the DM, made me feel like this guy essentially had the DM, and by extension the campaign, wrapped around his little finger. Little finger. Machiavelli. Never mind. So I ended up messaging the DM and telling him my problems with the dude, his smug, know-it-all attitude, and my suspicions that his character's ambitions of ruling behind the players pretty much undermined our own character goals, as it meant we'd have to play dumb lemmings who took everything he said at face value, and I did consider this to be some form of PvP, as it pitted our ambitions against his, which was ironic, as the DM made it very, very clear that no form of PvP was to be permitted in this game. The DM said it was okay, and that he understood, but he thought he could make it work. And with that I left. From what I heard from another player, the group fell apart 2 sessions after I left, after Mac tried to convince the guy who wanted to build a temple to his god to allow him to manage it in his stead while he was out adventuring. Cleric Bro refused, saying that this was a sacred duty of his, and that he would manage, but in the future, when it became larger, he'd sure need the help. This made Mac freak out, and then try to do the same with the other players, who also refuse, citing, the same exact reasons. Finally, when he then tried to claim some position of authority in the shared council we'd set up between players to ensure rulership of our shared town and bind us together, the only position left available to him was managing the maintenance and construction of the town's roads, which we'd all agreed upon and was okay by the DM, and which he was present for, but he was constantly messaging the DM to discuss the matter anyway. When he got this job, Mac left the chat immediately, dropping a message calling the position beneath him, and saying that the other players couldn't appreciate his character, and started bombarding the DM. The DM blocks him and then shuts down the game a week later, saying that his enthusiasm for it was gone. Well, that really does suck. It's interesting that he got so upset over the road thing, because if he was a true Machiavellian genius, he would know that managing a town's roads is a really, really important and surprisingly powerful position, and could benefit you in a lot of different ways, both politically and especially financially, so I do not understand where he was going with that, but anyway, this guy is clearly not a Machiavellian genius, and yeah, playing characters that are smarter than you is really, really difficult. And going to the DM is usually a good idea, but using that knowledge that the DM helps you get when you play a smart character against the other players, that's no fun. I like playing Machiavellian NPCs, but I've never done it as a player character, and I don't think it would work most of the time. Machiavellian characters often take advantage of others, especially in the traditional sense. If you want to play a Littlefinger type character or a Varys type character, yeah, they take advantage of people, and that's no fun if you're on a team. It could work, don't get me wrong, but it would be really hard to do, and clearly this guy lacks the maturity to make it work. So yeah. It's a shame that this campaign had to be ruined because of that guy. It really shows what happens when the DM doesn't handle a problem before it gets out of hand. And in this case, it only got out of hand in a couple of sessions. Don't let things fester, and don't be a dick who thinks he's a genius. Guess that's the message of this story. Saw a post here a while ago, and it reminded me of a DM I played with in college. He always wanted long and detailed backstories, basically page per decade, minimum of a paragraph per year lived. He wanted them, but he never used them in any way. We doubt he even read them. This, coupled with his eagerness to try and kill us, always made me feel like it was a waste of time. He also had this habit of forcing us into ERP, for some reason. As you imagine, a table full of nerds hadn't exactly been making any home runs. He, of course, boasted of having lost his V card, a fact he never wanted us to forget. I decided I wanted to take him down a peg. In one of his new games, I roll up a 50-year-old man. All my allies are 18 or so. We all submitted our essays the week before, and he said he read them. He congratulated us, inspired writing all around. So, the adventure starts. We kill some goblins and head to the second town to claim our reward. Immediately upon entering the second town, some ladies of the night began offering their services. DM announced he needed will saves all around. I didn't roll. The DM responded by saying,
"Dude, are you gonna make your will save there? Unless you want to spend your money already."
I think I should be immune to this will save.
Pfft, no. Roll that dice. There's a line of customers already starting to gather behind you.
Can I speak to you privately for a moment?
No, you're not gonna sob story your way out of this. There is nothing you can tell me that's going to save you.
Okay, man. Page 4, paragraph 3 in my backstory. My character's dick was bitten off by a lion whose fur he now wears. Awkward laughs and uneasy glances from the rest of the table. The DM and I stare coldly at one another. He starts to go red.
Fine, you can have a +10 to the save. Happy now?
Next fight, one of the other guys goes down and rolls up a new character. He submitted his 69-page essay of his elven wizard's backstory to the DM next week. That is when he finally allowed us to write shorter backstories. I've said this a couple times, but I don't think longer backstory equals better backstory. In fact, I usually prefer shorter backstories just because they're easier for me to read, and also, you don't really need a super long backstory most of the time. Usually, you can sum it up in a page, or maybe even less than that. So this DM requiring all of these backstories is pretty dumb. Him not reading it is even dumber. His weird ERP thing is even dumber. Essentially, dumb things all around, though I'm glad the players finally convinced him without causing any sort of scene. Good way to end the story. So this happened recently, just a couple of weeks ago actually. Apologies in advance for poor formatting, I'm on mobile. Story consists of the following. Me playing a tiefling barbarian, female could be described in terms of appearance as a goth Lara Croft. Roger playing a tabaxi rogue, kind of the comic relief. Stacy playing a half-elf bard, nice and girlfriend of the DM. Austin playing a human paladin of the sun, he was a Dark Souls nerd and probably was just playing paladin for the chance to shout Deus Vult. Chris, the DM. Pretty much your typical game shop DM, but not as larger. Unclean. He had his problems, but he could take care of himself well. How he managed to get a girlfriend, though, I have no idea. Alright, I'm going to try to keep this short to an extent so it doesn't drag on too long. I went to my local game store to see about getting the new Ravenloft book, when I noticed that they were finally doing a game store D&D game again. There, I met Roger, Stacy, Austin, and Chris. Chris, the DM, was wanting to do a bit of homebrewed version of a Faerun campaign, mostly just using the setting and rewriting the history. I asked if I could join their game, and Chris said I was more than welcome to. I've actually never played a tiefling before, so I figured I would try it out. In terms of my character, Liara, the tiefling barbarian. I drew her beforehand during my creative flow of character creation a week before. I whipped up a character sheet and wrote a cool backstory to fit a level 1 character, which was the level we started at. Stacy made her character pretty much as a blank slate, since she was new to the game and wanted to bond more with Chris, her boyfriend, doing the stuff he likes. The most she really experienced of a fantasy setting was watching Lord of the Rings. She was really nice, and I helped her a bit with her build, going for a bit of optimization. Austin was just doing his own thing in the corner of the table, laughing his ass off the entire time. I actually got along with him really well for the most part, partly because we both have autism. Roger was the only one at the table I knew, since he graduated a year before me. He knew what he was doing for the most part, but still asked some questions when needed. A bit late for descriptions, but we were all around the same age. Biggest difference being about 7 years, with Austin being the youngest 17 and Chris being the oldest at 24. We begin to play a week later, and everything is going well. We decided meeting at a tavern was good, so we met up at a tavern in Kalishan, where a genie woman was serving drinks and providing the night's entertainment. Roger's character was tasked with gathering a group of people to assist in finding and securing a magical artifact important to his employer. He found Stacy with her bow, Austin in his armor, and my tiefling Liara with her great sword at the bar. He offered the three of us a quarter of the profits if we accepted. We accepted, of course. Austin accepting if he could get a golden cross as well. Roger agreed, and we went on our merry way. After a tough battle against a rather large group of kobolds, we managed to find the magical MacGuffin, delivering it to Roger's boss. We got our fair share of gold, about 15 pieces each. It's here we find that the boss is obviously the BBEG. Said BBEG dismisses us, and our characters simply head back to the tavern. Dirty and sweaty, but with our heads still held high. We decide to drink to celebrate. Austin roleplays really well about his character drinking and preaching about the sun to the bar patrons. Meanwhile, Roger's character reveals to Stacy that he has a bit of a thing for her. So they roleplayed that for a little bit before an NPC approaches my character, who is drinking and enjoying the show the genie is putting on. The NPC makes a comment about how my character is dressed and how she'd look better in his bed. I say she isn't interested, and that they should try one of the brothels if he's so inclined. He obviously didn't like that, because he grabs my character by the arm and starts to try to pull. I pull back, and I'm asked to make a strength check. I roll, and I roll a 20, unnatural though. It doesn't succeed? The following dialogue ensues. Well, I grab my sword and try to stab him. You can't. Wait, why not? Because it's on the other side of the bar? Why would I leave my sword on the other side of the bar? That makes no sense. Just because... Okay, look, can someone help me out? Austin chimes in and says, do I notice this filthy heretic? Roll a perception check with disadvantage since you're drunk. Alright, 2 nat 20s. And the nat 20 rule doesn't actually apply here since you're not in combat. What is the modifiers? Okay, it's double 24s. Oh, well, that's still not enough. Roger and Stacy chime in. Okay, what about us? Roll a check at disadvantage. Why? We're not drunk or anything. Maybe not, but you're occupied with each other. Stacy gets a look on her face like, oh really? And then sets that aside to roll. Stacy rolls a 25 with modifiers, along with 26, a natural 20. Roger rolled a 19 and 21. He biffed the rolls. Did either succeed? No, of course not. Okay, look, this is BS. How does nobody notice this? They're too enthralled with the genie, and besides, your character isn't putting up too much of a fight. She's literally hitting him and yelling at him. How is that not putting up a fight? Well, she's dressed like that for a reason, isn't she? As he says this, he points his filthy fingers towards my part of the table. I follow his fingers' direction to my character sheet and sketchbook opened up to my character drawing. I just look at him dumbfounded. Looking at Stacy, his girlfriend, she looks just as shocked and a little scared to boot. Needless to say, I was done here, and so was everyone else. As we left, I heard Stacy yelling at Chris and him yelling back, but I couldn't tell what they said because I was so pissed off and concentrating on the fact that I needed to get the hell out of here. He removed me from the Facebook group chat and everyone else just left on their own. Whenever I go in there, he's still set up ready for a game. No players, though. I brought up the situation with the store owner, and all he would say was that it was a personal matter between me and Chris. He isn't advertising Dungeons & Dragons right now, but he's still paying that dipshit of a DM to sit at the table. Hell, even the Tuesday group is more understanding and fair than that guy. That's a story for another day, though. TLDR, DM's girlfriend's character is hit on by another PC. DM gets jealous and decides to, my character as revenge, justifying it with my character's choice of clothing. In case you were somehow wondering, the message of this story is don't be the absolute worst. Yeah, woo! Seriously, this is the worst I've seen from a DM. Probably. I might be forgetting something, but this is pretty bad. I mean, the sharp toenail story from a couple episodes ago was bad, but this is a DM. And the degree by which this guy pushes boundaries, it defies reasoning. That kind of behavior is never okay, and the best thing you can do is bail, which is what the players did, so good for them. I understand that romances in character can be awkward. In case you're unaware, I'm asexual/aromantic, so my experiences with romance aren't exactly what you'd call extensive. However, I still want to give my players an opportunity to romance an NPC if they wanted to, and one of them ended up doing so. The blood hunter of the party, played by a good friend of mine, ended up romancing one of the NPCs, played by me, and I decided to, go through with it. And it ended up being a great story. The two characters bounced off of each other really well, and the party really ended up enjoying it. No one was breaking any boundaries, and we were comfortable talking about that kind of thing because we were friends. Now, I understand that not every D&D group is going to be between good friends, and that's why Session 0 is really important. If you want to have a romance subplot in your campaign, you should talk to your players about it, because you don't know if someone's going to be comfortable with it or uncomfortable with it. Of course, this DM has much more deep-seated issues, and like I said before, if you get a DM like this, the best thing you can do is leave. If your DM is going to break boundaries like this in such an invasive way, in such a hostile way, leave. There is probably nothing you can do about it. Alright, if you guys enjoyed this episode of RPG Horror Stories and you want to let me know, then please do hit that like button. If you want to see more episodes of this series as well as my other content, then please do subscribe to Crisp's Tavern. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment 2 nat 20s to let me know you made it to the end of the video. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.